Hey guys, in today's video, I'll be doing something that I haven't done in a while, which is basically do a walkthrough of a Flask extension. So the walkthrough that I'm going to do today is going to be for Flask-Praetorian, and Flask-Praetorian is an extension for adding JSON Web Token support for APIs. So basically, it takes care of most of the hard work for you when it comes to having these tokens in your API, which is basically generating them and verifying that they're valid. So I've never used this library before, so I want to try it out because I'm currently working on an API course and I need to cover authentication. So I figured I can try a few different methods, and I came across this one. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to set up a simple example and kind of talk through my process of doing it, and hopefully we don't run into any issues. So here's the overview of it, and basically it just tells you that it gives you API security using JSON Web Tokens. So the features of the package, we see it can hash passwords. So instead of you using like the Workzerg generate password hash or using something like bcrypt, Flask-Praetorian can do that for you. Then you can verify plain text passwords against the hash passwords, which is something you would expect if you can hash passwords in the first place. Generate authorization tokens upon verification of passwords. So this is where the library is really useful because you don't have to do this yourself. If you see my video on generating and using Flask, or generating and using JSON Web Tokens in Flask, you can see that we had to do each step individually. But with this, it should take care of everything for us. So we'll see how that works. And then check requests to secure endpoints for authorization tokens or authorized tokens. So this is kind of like using Flask login. So with Flask login, you have that login required decorator. With this, you'll have a different type of decorator, but it's basically for making sure that the user who's trying to access that particular endpoint can do it based on the credentials that they're passing along in their request. And we'll see how that works soon. Supply expiration of tokens and mechanisms for refreshing them. That sounds very useful, and I'll have to see this in practice to see how it handles this. Ensure that users associated with tokens have necessary rules for access. So, authorization. Parse user information from request headers for use in client route handlers. I'm not quite sure what that means. Does it mean getting the token information from the request header and then translating that token to like a user object? That's what I'm guessing. So it's probably similar to Flask login in that sense, because like with Flask login, you have the current user object that's always available in your routes that are protected by login required. So I'm guessing this does something similar, but I can't be sure because of the way that it's written. Support inclusion of custom user claims and tokens. Okay, so you can add whatever you want to the JSON Web Token, because I think it's jot.io. We can take a look at how they're formed. And what I'll do is I'll use this site to kind of decode one that gets generated by Flask-Praetorian. So we see here we have the header, and then we have the payload. So I'm guessing we can add more information in there if we wanted to. And then finally, register new users using email verification. I didn't see that in the example when I took a look at that, but we'll see. So we'll go to the quick start and we'll install it. So I already have a project set up. So I'll use pip-env and I'll install Flask-Praetorian, and I cannot spell Praetorian. Let's see. Prae. I started to spell it correctly. Praetorian. Okay, so pip install Flask-Praetorian, and I don't have Flask installed, so I'm guessing it's going to install Flask for me. So this should only take a moment. And then once that's done, you know what, let me just set up some of the files here. So I'm going to use .env for this because I really like the pattern. So I'll create the Flask env file. So Flask app, it's going to be my API. And then the Flask environment will be development. And then I know I need a secret key because I'm dealing with things dealing with encryption. I need a secret key. I'll just type in random characters. It's just an example. And then I'll create a new folder, call this my API. I'll create the dunder init in here. And from Flask, import a Flask app. So this should be in a create app function. So create app and pass in dunder name. Okay, so this is almost done installing. I don't know why it's so slow right now, but this is the basics of the dunder init. So we see in the example here, they're using Flask SQL Alchemy, so I'll use it as well to create the user model. So basically our API will have multiple users, and each user will have credentials, so username and password. They can also have roles, and then that user's information will somehow be translated into a JSON web token. So we'll see that in action. So we'll need Flask SQL Alchemy. So let me start a pip inv. And I will install that. So pip inv install Flask SQL Alchemy. I'll create another file for extensions. And in here, I'll instantiate it. So Alchemy, import SQL Alchemy like that, and db SQL Alchemy. And then we'll use init app on db here. So I need to import it. So from .extensions import db, db init app. We're going to pass in the app object, and we'll probably do something similar for Praetorian. So I see it here. So we want to import Praetorian from Flask-Praetorian. So from Flask _ Praetorian import Praetorian, and then I can go ahead and instantiate it. In the documentation, the object is named guard. I actually like that name, so I'll use guard. Whereas, normally it's something that's like very closely related to the class. So maybe just like a lowercase version, but I like guard because there's for Praetorian guard. So there's the second one. I don't need Flask course because I'm going to do this all on my local machine. So I think that's it. So now we can work on the model. So I'll create a file called models, and this is where I'm going to create my user class. So from .extensions, I'm going to import that db object, and I'll create a class called user with db.model, and I'll create an ID column. So the ID is going to be equal to db column. It's going to be an integer, and I want it to be the primary key as well. So I have this, and now there are some fields that I need for Flask-Praetorian. So they're kind of here, but it's not explained in this particular section of the documentation. So I saw it in this section here. So in the notes, so requirements for the user class. So it looks like they have 5 requirements. So we need to provide a lookup class for taking a SQL argument of the name of the user, and it should return an instance of the user class. So that's a bit weird. Normally it's like the ID, but I'm guessing there's something for ID as well. So yeah, so identify here is passing an ID, and it returns the user object. Whereas you can also pass the name of the user and return the user object as well. So they want both. Here for role names, if you have roles, you should return a list of roles in a string. To keep this simple, I won't have any roles, so I'll just return an empty string in all cases. A password instance should return the hash password assigned to the user, and the identity should return the ID of the user. So I can basically take these. So I need a username and a password. And first, let's look up that the lookup one. So yeah, if you have a username, then you need to filter by the username. So I'll have a username, a password, and I won't have roles, and I won't have is active, just to keep things really simple. So let me add those two columns. So username, it's going to be db column db string, and let's just make both of these 50 characters. The password should be a bit longer. They have db text for the password, so I'll just use that. So db.text for the password because it is going to be hash. So I have those two things, and now I need to cover the methods that are necessary for this. So first is a class method called lookup. So class method, and then it's called lookup. And it takes in the class itself and then the name of the user. So username, right? And then it needs to return an instance of the user whose username got passed in. So return user query filter by, and then I want to filter by username equals username, and then just return like the first one. Let's see, or none. Let's use or none. So one or none, just in case that user doesn't exist. Okay, so that's exactly the same, and I don't need to use user here because I have access to the class itself, so CLS. And then there's the identity one. So identity, and this takes in the class as well because it's a class method, and then some ID. So I can do CLS query filter by ID equals ID. I can also use get, but one or none really doesn't make a difference. So yeah, here, so we have get ID. I use filter by, and then one or none. They both do exactly the same thing, although my code is a bit longer. So now we need well, let's go back here. So I'm on the wrong section. User class. Okay, so I have the lookup, I have the identify, the role names instant attribute. So this is role names, right? And like I said, I want to return an empty list because I want to avoid that part for now, just to make sure this video doesn't become too long. So role names, yeah, and it's a property. So just making sure I didn't miss anything. So property. And let's go back to the user class here. So lookup, identify, role names, and then I need a password instance attribute and an identity instance attribute. So these should be pretty simple. So property, so password. So return self.password, and then I need a property for the identity. So let's see. The identity just returns the ID, and I don't see one for the password, but I'll put it there anyway because the documentation says so, but I'm guessing it's not necessary if it's not in that example. So this is called identity, takes in self and returns self.id. So if you've used Flask login before, this may be familiar to you. Basically, you're creating some methods in the class that handle the connection between your class and the Flask login extension. So this is similar, except that in Flask login, there's a user mixin that you can use that supplies these for you if you use like the most basic case. So in this particular case, I think that would be helpful. If you just name your things by the convention that the library gives you, then you can just have a mix-in, because like there's nothing special about username and an ID. Really, the only thing that I think would need to be defined is the roles here, and even that can be handled in a standard way. But I also understand having a lot of flexibility behind it, so that's a good thing. So I think we're done with the user class. So let's see. I think I can get away with having the configuration as the default. So let me just make sure there are defaults for everything. So I already have the secret key, and I can tell they don't want you to have the secret key as a default. And then everything else has a default. So I think I should be okay. So if I go back to the example, let's see. So I have the extension is instantiated. All this is going to be okay. So I need to init app. You need to pass in the class along with initializing the app. So in here, I can import guard, if I can spell guard correctly. I also need to import my model. So from models, import user, then I can init it. So guard dot init app. I'll pass the app and the user. Okay, so that should be okay. And they initialize the database after, but I don't think that's a big deal. And then here they add some data to the database. So they're adding data to the database using the hash password method from guard, or the function, whatever it is. And I believe I need to use that at least by default, because when it goes to check to see if the password is valid, the only way it can compare the hash is if it knows what the hashing method is, and you can only use hash password. So I'm guessing there's a way to change the way things are hashed, but by default you use hash password. So let me go ahead and create some users. Let's see, what would be the best way to do this? So I need to return app, and I just want to create a few users. So what I can do is I can create a command. So commands, so let's see, import click, and then I want to use with app context. So from Flask, I think .cli import with app context, and then I can create one here. So click commands name, create users, and then I'll create a function, create users. I think I'm doing this right. Oh, it needs to have the with app context here. And then what I want to do is I just want to create some users. So I'm going to need to bring in guard from Flask-Praetorian. So from .extensions, import guard. And then I also need to bring in the user model so I can create these users. So from models, import user. Okay, so let's create a user. So I'll just give them numbers as their names. So user, username as 1. And then the password is going to be guard.hash password. And is it as simple as just passing in a value? Yeah, so let's just pass in really simple values for the password. So I'll do the same thing for these, and I'll create like 4 users. Oh, 3 users. 3 is enough. Okay, so 2, 3, and then the password will be 3 and 2. So not the most secure passwords, but they're passwords. Then I'll add them to the session. So db session add all takes in a list. So 1, 2, and 3, and then db session commit. And then I think that's it. So I need to add this command onto my app. So under init and from .commands import create users, and I need to add that. So app CLI add command and create users. So I just need to do the settings for this. You know what? I'll put the settings in here just to keep it really simple. So app config secret key is going to be, so I need to import OS. From OS import environ, and this will be environ get and then secret key, because I have it in my .env file. And I'll do something similar for the SQL Alchemy database URI. So SQL Alchemy database URI is going to be environ get and then SQL Alchemy database URI, just like that. So let me go ahead and add this in here, and it's just going to be SQLite database on my local machine. So SQLite 3 slashes, and let's call this db.sqlite3. Just realized I need a command to create the database. So let me do that now. Click command name, create database. And then this also needs the app context, and then create database and db create all. And I didn't import the db object, so I need db. Then I need to add this command. So create database. If I go to dunder init, create database. Okay, so let's see if this works. All right, the first try probably won't. So create database. And there's no such command, create database. I need to install python.env. So this should be pip env. And then after this installs, hopefully I won't have too many errors when I go to run this. But just looking ahead while I wait for this. So I have the commit there, yeah. So after I do this part, this is where I get into the interesting stuff, the interesting stuff for the API. So we have a login route, and then we have routes that are protected. So I only need one protected route because I won't be dealing with roles. So we'll get to working on that soon. So let me fire up Postman just to get it ready. So I know I'll need it in a moment. So it's done. So let me try that Flask create database again. And let's see. So the user class must have an identify class method. So let me clear this out. Oh, don't save. Okay, so I can get back to this in a moment. But we see that the user class must have an identity class or identify class method. So did I just give it the wrong name? So if I go to models, I have identity, or is it identify? Did I not read that correctly? Yeah, so there's identify and there's identity. So the property should be identity and the class method should be identify. Okay, so that's a F. Pretty small change. So create database. Let's see if this works. Okay, so no such command create database. I think I need to actually add it. So dunder init, yeah. So app CLI add command create database. Okay, so let me try that again. Create database. And it looks like the database was created. So if I open it up, my API DB SQLite 3, I have the user table there. Okay, cool. So I have that part working, and then I need to add in those initial users. So it's called create users. So Flask create users. And it says can't set attributes. So I don't know what attribute it's talking about. It's talking about the password. So let's see. Can't set attribute for the password, which is kind of strange. So we have username and password. Models, we have password, so that should be okay. So guard.hash password and then the actual password text. Let me make sure there's nothing that I missed here. So the way they do it is it's exactly the same. So there's a username and there's a password. So not quite sure where things went wrong. Username, password. Let's see if the hash generates anything. So if I go to commands and print this, let's see. Maybe it's throwing an error because the password is too short or something. Nope. So we see Here's the hash password, but it doesn't like it, and I don't see why. So let me try setting this to something like ABC. Yeah, ABC. And let's see if it still fails on that particular user or if it fails on the next one. So it's still failing on 1. So let's see, initialize instance. Can't set attribute. This is on, so am I missing something in the class? And here's some db.model. Yeah, just looking at it, like everything looks, oh, wait a minute. That's the problem. So we have this property here for password, and then we also have password here, which we really don't need because if you use like the instance, so if I have like 1, I can do .password, and that will give me the password directly. So this is kind of saying, you know, so yeah, looking at it, I don't need these two. So I really didn't think about that when I was doing it, but it makes sense why I was getting that error. So I can go ahead and undo everything, put the password back, and it should be okay. So let's go ahead and create users. And now the syntax is just invalid because I have like a stray. Where's that coming from? Oh, there. Okay, so create users. And now it's saying table user has no column name password. Okay, so I know what happened. No, I don't know what happened there. So I thought it, so DB SQLite 3, my API. So tables, so let's look at the schema. Okay, I know. It was that property that was an issue. So what I'll do is I'll just remove the database and I'll just do it again since it's just a SQLite database. So create database and then create users. Okay, so now that works. So if I open up the table and then select star from users, from user, not users. Okay, so I have the 3 users in there and they have their hash password. Okay, so all that stuff is working. So we basically got everything set up. So now we can go ahead and actually start using this. So let's create a file called routes and we'll create a blueprint for it. So from Flask import blueprints, we'll just call this API. It was blueprint API under name. And then we'll create a route for the API. And one will be login. So login. And then another one will be some protected endpoint. So let's just call this protected. And then I'll have a final one that won't be protected. So let's call this open because it's open for everyone. So open. So with this one, we can just return something. So I'll have JSONify here, and then I'll return JSONify results hello. Okay, so that should be good enough there. And then these two I have to work on. So if you look at their example again, so basically all that's happening is the data gets returned from the JSON data. So it's taken out of the JSON data, and then gar.authenticate is using it's used, and then you encode the token. So that's pretty simple. So let's see. So this is going to be let's call this JSON data equals requests get JSON. So I need this request object. And then username is going to be JSON Data username. And then password is going to be JSON Data password, just like that. And then I can use Flask-Praetorian to validate this. So from Flask_Praetorian import guard. No. I'm importing guard from extensions. So from extensions, import guard. And then I'll use the authenticate. So guard.authenticate username and password. I think that's how it works. And it returns the actual user. So user equals that. And then I can create the token based off that user. So it's called access token. So let's just return it here. So access token. And this is going to be guard. And then what is it called? Encode token. So encode JWT token, and you pass in the user. So this should be in JSONify, just like that. So this should be enough to at least try. So we can try our open one and we can try our login one just to see what happens. So let me bring in this blueprint and then register it. So from .routes import API, and then app register blueprint API. Okay, so let's try running the app. Hopefully there are no errors. There aren't. So now let's go to my local host, port 5000/open. Okay, so we see the open endpoint works. So now let's try the login. So first, this is going to fail because I'm not passing in any JSON data. So let's see what it says. Yeah, none type object is not subscriptable. So let me go to the body and change this to raw, and then this to JSON. And then let me put the username and password. So username is going to be 1. And then the password is going to be 1 as well, but I'll put 2 just to see what the error is by default. So let's send that. And we see we get this nice error saying authentication error. It's a 401 status code, which is nice. It has a message, the password is incorrect, and we have the status code 401. So now if I type in, let's say 1, then there's no identity, so no attribute identity. So let's see, where did I mess that up? So if I go to models, did I take off too much? Yeah, so the identity property needs to stay. So identity self return ID. The password one was bad, or self.id. The password one was bad because it had the same name, but identity is okay because identity is different from ID. So if my password were something else like password hash, then I need a method called password that is a property, and then it can return that password hash. So yeah, that was a mistake on my part. So let me try that again. And it says the object is not JSON serializable. So let's see where it's going wrong. So encode the token, and let's see how they did it. Yeah, so it's basically this part is returning something that can't be encoded. So let's see. Let's call this token, and we'll print out what the token is before it gets returned. So access token is token, and then I'll send this request again, and it just worked. I don't know why it didn't work the first time. Okay, so maybe just something in the order of execution when it's inside the return statement. I'm not sure. So we have the token. So let's go ahead and copy this token and see what gets placed in it. So if we go here, paste it in here, we see we have an ID, and then nothing else is relevant to any specifics in our app because we only have a username and a password. So if we have the ID, that's good enough. We don't exactly need the users. So I think this is good. I think this is good enough. It's hard talking on these videos where I don't edit. So now let's try having a protected route to see what happens there. So to have the protected route, we just have decorator Flask-Praetorian auth required. So we'll import that. So in my routes here at the top, from Flask-Praetorian imports auth required, and then we'll just put it here. So auth required, and let's just I'll return something. So JSONify results. You are in a special area. Okay, so first we are going to try to protect it without passing the token. So let's go to /protected and then send, and it gets missing token header. So once again, we have a nice message. So what I'll do, and I don't need to send any JSON data. Oh, and by the way, this should have been post for a login. So we can just change this to methods post, but it's not really a big deal in terms of this example, but normally it would be a post instead of a get. So here protected is a get request. And for the headers, I need to pass in the header. So let's see for authorization if they have anything for this. Let's see API key. No, so we need to see exactly what kind of token it is. So we have a bearer token and the actual token. So it's going to be authorization. So the key is authorization, and then bearer, and then the actual token. So let me copy the token again. So first, let me go back to login. So login, posts, and let's use user number 2 this time. So body, JSON, and then 2. Okay, so we'll take the token from here, and then we will go to this tab and add it here. So we have authorization as the key, and the value is bearer, and then the token, so a space. So hopefully that's all we need. And we see you are in a special area. So it is working for us, and things are pretty easy. So if I just take off this beginning E and try it again, it should fail, which it does. So we know that the token is working correctly. So we see we have the basics of it set up, and it really didn't take much effort to get it to work. Let's see what happens when the lifespan on the tokens is way shorter. So if we go to, let's see, where was it? Configuration settings. Access lifespan. Okay, so let's have the access lifespan down to like 1 minute. So I'll just add this to the configuration, and let's add this configuration in the Dundernet itself. So app config, and it's a dictionary with minutes. Let's do 1. So we'll give the token. So let's see what it says. So it expires. Let's see. That looks about right. So first I will try it here, and then we'll wait a minute to see what happens. So I'm in the special area, and I just have to wait a few seconds. So let me go to this part where it talks about the expiration time. So after it expires, it must not be accepted. And I don't really see anything else in here. So we'll see what happens when it expires. So still valid, still valid. Okay. So expired access error. So access permission has expired. So I don't really see anything on handling the expiration like automatically. So I'm guessing like, you know, if the consumer of the API is using it and they get this particular error, then they have to request another password directly. So let's see if that's truly the case. So is there anything in the example that talks about this? I don't see anything. And then looking for so the lifespan. So we can refresh it if it's not expired. So I'm trying to figure out how to refresh it if it's still active. So looks like the documentation hasn't been completed yet, which is, you know, always a problem. So let's go to the code and let's take a look. So decorators is where we should start looking first. So auth required, roles accepted, verify. Nope. None of those look useful. Let's try utilities. I don't see anything there. Utilities. I'm pretty sure exceptions isn't going to help. Constants, that definitely won't help. So yeah, there's really nothing else here. So that is just something that I'll have to look into. So I'm just looking. So encode token, refresh. Okay, so here's one, refresh token. So let's see. I'm using the encode. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this really quick. We'll call this refresh. So refresh, and then this should have auth required, and then we'll call this refresh. So I'm going to generate a token. So I'll basically have the same output, but this time it's going to be refresh. So here it's guard dots, and then let's see, refresh token. Do I need to pass anything? Param token. So I'm guessing you don't pass the token in the header anymore. You just pass it in the request. So let's do that. So JSON data equals requests, get JSON. And then the token is going to be JSON data, and then I'll put it in something called token. So let's try this. So if I go back here, I'll create a new tab, and this will be for refresh. So refresh. So not seeing anything at the moment, and then I'll edit the body JSON, and then this shall have a token in it. So my token is here. So the refresh time period is still valid, so I should be able to pass my token. And okay, so that looks okay. So what I'm hoping to see here is when I send, I'll get another token in return, because right now when I send this request, I have the expired access error. So let's see what happens. So I get a new access token. So I'll just take this token and then I'll put it in my header here, send, and I'm back in the special area. So yeah, if the token expires, then the consumer of the API can just call the refresh routes with their old expired token, and in return they'll get a new token. So it's just up to them to store the token correctly. So I know this took a while, and I made quite a few mistakes and probably needed some water because I could barely talk at times. But if you follow me through this video, hopefully you have a good overview of how Flask-Praetorian works. I like it myself. I'll continue exploring other options, but after all the setup issues, I think it's pretty useful because it's so simple. Like, I really like the way it's set up in terms of working similar to Flask login. So I'll definitely consider this for the course. So if you have any questions about this or you want me to cover other things in it, just let me know. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. So thank you for watching, and I will talk to you next time.